was called up in November the 14th. I was called up at Copthorne, and then I was there until we finished our training, and we moved down to the Maltings on the 20th of December. I was there for my Christmas dinner.
1939 was that?
The 40.
Oh, 1940.
Yeah, yeah. We had quite a nice dinner, but they told us that after the dinner, after we'd had our dinner, we were free to go. We could go out. And anyway, we were having our dinner and it started to snow. Anyway, the sergeant major, he was out of this world. He was one of the nastiest persons I've ever come across. And he said, no one will leave the barracks until you've swept all the snow up. And they give some of them give some a shovel and some a broom. And of course it was snowing, it was coming down as fast as we were. Anyway, it stopped at 4 o'clock and then they allowed us out, so we were out at 4 o'clock. The living conditions that, they wouldn't tolerate it today. There's no eating, and of course it's a terrible place for being cold. Never been so cold in all my life. When we were told we were going there, the lads that had been there before, they said it's Rat Hotel. They called it Rat Hotel. They said there's more rats there than there is anywhere. When we got down to the Maltings, they gave us it was like a sack, a big sack for sleeping on. And you had to go down into the garage, and we were sent in batches. And anyway, the first batches come back, they said, what's the rats? They said when they were getting the straw, the rats were running out of the straw. And we had to fill and then we slept on that. There was no beds or anything, you just slept on there with a couple of blankets. I mean, the only wash houses we'd got were down on the ground floor, and it was a series of long troughs. And then over the top of the trough was a little stand with a little shelf on where you could put your mirror, and then there was cold water taps all the way down. No eating, just cold water, so you had to shave with cold water.
What sort of things did you train at? Where did you train? In the fields at the back?
At the back, under the railway bridge. Make sure on your left there's a little salt course there. Little salt course up the way to green fields. Right? And we did that, and then we did route marches from there. Right through the town there, towards Mensley and all that way, over the top. Come back down the canal and all the way back. So I say that was it, side of Maltings. So we used to do our route marches, forced march right up to the Wrekin, and that was the firing range. Still there today if you've seen it. The firing range, live ammunition on that, and then you have to force all the way back, run so far for forced march, then stop, 2 minutes, a lump of dry bread, whatever it is, a lump of cheese, no water, drink a water bottle. And you did a couple of times the way back. When you got to the Ormond, you had to come down the side of that with the ropes. No parachutes on them neither. Right down the canal, and the last 2 lads that got in had to peel 56 pound of potatoes. So I finished up there and I did about, rough figure, 3.5 months. Oh, January, February, March and part of April. I was there when the D-Day on the thing, fully armed, and they took in case any paratroopers shot you, like this. The following week, they shifted us out because we'd been there longer than so the other boys. The Baltic, about 20 of us altogether, I expect. The lads who was from the air, we all joined up together. And the next thing they do, we're on these boats. Half full of Canadians, and those all mixed up. They were playing housey, bingo, God knows what on it. I said, what the hell's housey? Never heard of it. Next thing I knew, we were going out, and all the problems you can have, we eat, drink, or anything. I got drunk in the Lord, didn't I? Get them down, you happy days here again, and some of the other lads. And I went back down, I fell out of the hammock, I couldn't get in them. Never took your clothes off in my life, just fell out, I said, oh hell, went back up, lead over the side, out a mouthful of water, salt water. Up come the lot, didn't it?
Oh.
So when we finally got back on the other side, we landed alongside the British and Canadian sector, But our lads then were about 4 or 5 mile inland. So right, you could call, well, so-and-so's, yeah. Get on these, you go down that way, you meet your regiment to take you up to where you've got to go. Somerset's this way, 3 bags full. The next thing I knew, we were in the front line.
It really started at harvest time. It's logical, really. Barley being the chief raw material, the only raw material that we have. Well, except water, we use water as well. So the year started in sort of July. Well, harvest started in those days in the 1980s, sort of July, August time. Harvest had got earlier now. Harvest can start in June nowadays. But harvest started, and I would buy the barley for our maltings, also for other maltings within the Allied group, and bought about 30,000, between 25 and 30,000 tonnes of malt from local farms in Shropshire and so on. And so that was a big input. It's about £3 million worth of money going into farmers' purses in Shropshire and the neighbouring counties. It's a very good barley growing area, Shropshire. We try to encourage the farmers in Shropshire to grow malting barley, and we would take them into the maltings in Shrewsbury, and then we would take that barley in from the beginning of the harvest through till about Christmas time, which is our peak barley intake period. So having got our barley in, we've got our supply of barley. The day-to-day operation was to make sure that we'd got barley coming into our maltings, control quantities per tonne. It would then go into the malt houses, would be steeped, which is covered with water for 24 hours. It's a seed, like any seed, it needs water to enable it to germinate and enable it to grow. So it would be underwater for 24 hours, the water would be changed every so often. It would then be discharged from the steep tanks onto the malting floors and would grow there for a period of 5 days. It would have to be moved each day, because if it was just left without being moved, the rootlets then, which would be growing, would mat together, and if it wasn't moved, you would be able to roll it up as a carpet after 5 days and so on. After 5 days it would go up to the kilns to be dried, and at the end of the drying process we would raise the temperatures, and that was where you got the different colours in the malt. The darker colour that we would make, which is it's just like sort of syrup in a pan, really. The more you heat it up, the darker it becomes, and so on. It becomes ultimately treacle. But it's the same principle in curing the kilning of the malt, and that would mean that the darker malts that we would make would be then brewed into ale beers, and we would also then make a less coloured malt, which would be used for lager beer production.
You've probably seen the holes in the floor where all the vats were, so we called them. And what they did was fill those with barley and soak it for a number of days, having drained the water off to let air through. And when you started first thing in the morning, some of you would start emptying, depending on which particular floors or level you were on. But you'd empty these vats out onto a big pile on the floor in those days, and then you'd slowly move it down the floors, opening it out so as to be able to control the growth, because the secret of turning barley into malt is to let the little spurt that eventually it would be the green shoots of the barley. If it was growing, you want those green shoots to come as far up the barley as you could, so that all the starch in the barley had turned to sugar, and then you had to stop it dead. That's why it went on the kilns to roast it. In the old days, when I first started there, you had to keep turning it with wooden shovels or forks.
And forks, yeah.
And it was all manual labour, whereas eventually they cut down the number of staff they employed, and you had machinery to do most of the work.
And all those floors where there was holes are now, there was
Yeah.
big vats there, you'll see in there with the, and each one of them, there was 2 ton of dry barley in each one. So before each floor, but when it was wet, it'd be heavier still. And on those, on every big floor here, there was always 8 ton behind one another. In other words, 4 ton up the front and 4 ton at the back of it, because every 4 days it was on the cycle of changing over, like, so it was always something behind it at the time, like. And that's how you carried all that weight all the time. In them days we had to turn by hand.
Yeah.
All we had was a wooden fork, a wooden shovel, and our boots was string bottoms for the same as crushing the corns. But when health and safety come out, they were taken away because they mechanised it and they put electric turners on, which we used to have to pull. Right, when if your boot get cold in it, you cut your toes off, like.
Yeah.
So that had gone then, like.
So the plough was, that's literally what it was. It was like, it had a long shaft and a handle, on the end of which was a metal frame with 3 prongs. And basically it was, the angle of the handle was at such a point that you could pull it through the grain, and it would cut under the grain at the floor level and turn it over, and that aerated the grain and that kind of stuff. So that's what we do on nights, and this is what I can say now that I couldn't have said at the time. When the lads did the work during a normal day, obviously they were very careful about how they did it. Now, in order to pull the plough safely, you pulled it towards you, in like, take 2 steps back and just keep pulling it. When there's nobody watching, you turned around, you dragged it behind your back, which meant you could virtually gallop up the floors. And so you learnt very quickly, and it was pretty hard graft thinking about it, but you learned very quickly that whereas a floor would be timed, I can't remember, say 20 minutes, you could actually plough it, stick plough it as we called it, in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, because you got to the stage where you literally ran with the bloody thing. And the bonus there, if you were on nights and therefore unsupervised, was that the quicker you got the work done, the quicker you came to your free time. So your lunch break extended vastly. So we'd whip around the Shropshire Maltings and literally run up and down stairs, and in fact get into competition with one another, because you're ploughing on a, say, floor, 2 floors from the top, the floor above you, your mate's working, and you'd hear the plough cutting through the floor, and you think, crikey, he's like half a piece ahead of me. So and it became a bit competitive, which was good. Jump in the van, go to Castle Maltings, do the same there, go to Bellevue Maltings, do the same there, come back here. So if we started at 9:30, by 12 o'clock we were done. Couldn't clock off till 6, so we then used to cook a meal, eat the meal, and we'd get our heads down for a couple of hours. And then in the morning we'd have to go around and do the boilers, the fires, stoke the fires up for the incoming day shift. Do a few odd, what we call drainings and wettings, which is when the barley's put in the steeps and it's covered in water, it's underwater for a certain period of time, then the water has to be released and it's allowed to settle, and then more water's put on it, and that goes through a cycle. So part of our job was draining and re-wetting certain steeps, again at the request of the foreman. He would leave what needed doing.
When I first went to the Maltings, the barley was on the floors for up to 8, 9, 10 or 11 days in the winter. We finished up by 4 days. In other words, and when you used to empty the barley, it was being big heaps at the back so the air didn't get to it. After my experience, I turned it what we called strep malting. We were able to buy turning machines, electric machines which turned the barley, which was another great invention. And also, still in the maltings, you've still got one cable device left, and we put all those in, and from that cable we had levelling boards where you could put the barley and you could spread it out and give it some depth. And so the men would still barrow it, and you could board it straight through. So once we emptied it on the entire floor, each side, not at the back, and keep on moving forward. Because when you had 3 or 4 pieces, you used to have to turn that by hand, turn that, and you can understand how many people used to work. Every floor required 2 men all the time on that floor. Eventually, less than 1 man. 6 men did those 6 floors and 4 in the little end, we call the little end. So we were able to make our maltings very efficient, and we were able to get the workers right down and double their salary, and nobody left us, they waited for us.
The kilns were operated by using anthracite grains, coal. It had to be very high quality grain, in fact the highest quality coal that you can get, anthracite grains, came from South Wales. And the reason for that was that the fumes from the coal go through the grain bed. On the kilns there's a wire mesh floor, the grain sits on top of the grain, so they've got the kiln at the bottom, the air rises, drawn up through fans and so on through the grain, takes out the moisture, dries it out and so on. So you couldn't have lower quality coal because you get the smoke coming in and you therefore get the smell of the smoke in the malt, which would not be acceptable.
Basically what happens is 2 guys are like, and you were rotated for these jobs, so you knew when you were on the kiln, and it's a dirty job. It's not a nice job at all, and it's hard graft. So when it got up to the kiln, it dropped into a thing called a spreader, and the fireman used the spreader, and it just literally threw it across the kiln. And he would use this machine in a spreading fashion, and eventually all the grain from the floors would be on the kiln, and he'd go on with a shovel out and just knock down any little lumps he had. But basically, it would fill the kiln to that kind of level. Yeah, 2.5 feet, maybe 3. And when you walked in and looked, it was just like a completely level kiln full of barley. So it would lie there for 3, 4, 5 days, depending on the cycle. Then it would have to come off, and you've got to wear a mask, A, because of heat, and because of the amount of dust that comes off kilned barley is incredible. So you'd spend like an hour, I'm sure it was about an hour, and 2 of you would do it, and you take it in turns, as we called it, on the bucket, and gradually you clear the kiln.
Everybody had their turn on the kiln. All year round, I just forget now the temperatures just go up to, but we weren't allowed on there unless it was down about 60. Well, all you had on was a pair of shorts and that t-shirt.
That kiln, at one time, was the biggest single-span kiln in Europe.
You would really sweat in there and you're doing your beer. You used to allowed to have beer then.
2 pints a day, and an extra one if you were working on the kiln.
Yeah. I had a particular guy there, George Clee was the foreman at the time, and I had this, he said to me, he said, will you take this bloke on the kiln with you? He said, he'll do it. He said he's been in the Sahara Desert and all the rest of it, used to hot weather and all that. So I said, okay. So I said to him, you're going to take your shirt off, mate. Just keep your t-shirt on, but you're doing nothing else on. Oh, I've been here there. I said, I've heard it all before. Anyway, we start to clear all this malt, 2'6", 3 foot, and he collapsed. So I chucked him over my shoulder, took him outside, and the lads took him off to the mess room, and they was going to send somebody else to me to help clear it. I cleared it all myself, and this boy come in, oh, don't know how you do it, he said. I said, I thought you should have all this hot weather and all that. Anyway, he was the shortest we ever had. He was there.
What would you like to see become of the place?
Well, that part of Shrewsbury was the working class part of Shrewsbury.
Yeah.
Everybody lived at the other side. Didn't
That's
they?
right. Yeah.
And in the old towns, it's always the east because the wind blows that way, and all the rest of it. All the town's infection, all the town's dirty stuff used to blow towards Ditherington. That's basically the history behind Shrewsbury. And when when they before they built the station, there were 600 to 800 people living in that area who worked at the flax mill. 600 to 800 people. And there was no building between then and Shrewsbury there. You could see the flax mill. There was no building between Shrewsbury and it at then. You can imagine what the flax mill looked like from Shrewsbury, before that church was built. But I think I'm quite impressed with what they're thinking of doing. It's a grade 1 building. It's got to stand up.